Thanks all for joining us today. We're glad to welcome Dr. Simona Mancini to the Center for Brain Recovery. Simona is a Ramon y Cajal Fellow and leader of the Neurolinguistics and Aphasia Group. She obtained her PhD in cognitive science from the University of Siena in Italy. Her scientific activity lies at the intersection between theoretical linguistics and cognitive neuroscience, focusing on core computational mechanisms and their processing correlates in adult speakers, but also second language and language impaired speakers using behavioral and neuroimaging techniques. She also works on the development of computerized tools for the assessment of language impairment in aphasic patients. She has participated as a PI and collaborator in several research projects funded by both national and international agencies. She has been visiting scholar at the University of La Laguna, University of Trento, and the IUSS. The network of her active collaborations includes European, North American, and Canadian universities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Simona Mancini.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here, and I'm actually a little bit nervous as well. What I'm going to talk about today is some work that we have been doing. Some of this is what Karen has also been doing. You know her, she was here last year, and some work that I've been doing on my own. I mean, I've always worked on syntax, and I realized the last years that people who work with me don't want to work on syntax. So it's me who, follows up this legacy. So I grew up as a linguist, and I've always been interested in syntax. So the title should have been something like Dynamic Interplay Between Language and Domain General Functions in Syntactic Processing, basically. So now, so when we talk and speak and understand language, we tend to weave and establish a very dense net of relations. So like the one that we see between cakes and are, between brother and bakes, or his and brother. And so while this seems to be a very dense net of relations that we effortlessly or almost effortlessly process, it is quite less intricate compared to what we see in Spanish or in English or in Italian, another very morphologically rich language. So here we see that determiners and nouns, and not only nouns and verbs, but also determiners and nouns are engage in this syntactic relation. So today we're going to talk about how we comprehend and how we produce these syntactic relations, and how whether we establish them automatically during online processing, and also whether they are how domain specific or domain general, the mechanisms that underlie this the establishment of these relations are. And I'll share some data from young adults with both behavioral and with EEG, and also some data from brain damage participants. The establishment of relations does not occur in a vacuum. So before we put together element A and element B, there's some necessary step that goes on. So one of these is decomposition or morphological decomposition. So when element A comes in, we morphologically decompose it, and we assume that this mechanism is early and automatic. So there are several MEG data that point to this mechanism, something that is quite fast, around 170 milliseconds post-stimulus presentation, both in English and Spanish. But what does the parser do with the information that it extracts? So the featural information, like the numerosity, or whether the noun that it's being processed is feminine or masculine. So this is something that it's highly marked in Spanish. So it most likely maintain this information in memory for subsequent use. So, and we've seen in a series of studies, high-tracking studies, both in Spanish and English, that it is different whether the information that is extracted is from a potential subject. In this specific case, it is maintained over the course of a reading, for example, through an embedded closed, and when the information is extracted from something that cannot potentially bear an argument role, so being a subject. In this case, that the information is not kept in the focus of attention. So this was work that Bojana Ristic did during her PhD. Now, when B comes in, we decompose it and morphologically decompose it to extract information. And if information that comes from B, so information that comes from B is checked with what we have from A, and if everything checks out, then the relation is established. Now, these are syntactic combinatorial mechanism, but what we know, I mean, there's a lot of studies on basic combinatorial mechanism like phrase structure rules. There's a lot of evidence that Frederitz's lab has produced over the course of the year. And so it is assumed that these mechanisms are automatic and obligatory. So they usually occur in early parsing stages. So and they're usually indexed by early negative effects like those you see here. I cannot see the pointer. Like those you see here on the right. So so these negativities arise usually when there's a deviation. I mean, when there's something that is off. I mean, something that deviates from the expected input. So as I said, they're described as automatic and obligatory. And this means also that, or at least it is claimed, that they're performed outside of conscious awareness, so automatically, and without the intervention or the modulatory effect of domain general processes. And all this automaticity, obligatoriness contrasts with the controlled nature of later processing mechanisms that are usually associated with interpretation, overall interpretation or reanalysis in the presence of a mismatch, for example, and that electrophysiologically are indexed by late positive effects, like those you see here on the right. So these late controlled processes are conscious, are expected to be conscious, and dependent, therefore, on attentional mechanisms, on domain general mechanisms in general. So there's a lot of literature on this automaticity, obligatoriness, let's say, of basic syntactic structure. But one question that we can ask is whether all syntactic computations are automatically performed. So if we take some of the mainstream neurocognitive models of sentence processing, we know that phrase structure rules, so whether a determiner can be combined with a noun based on word category information, is something that precedes the establishment of other morphosyntactic relations, for example, or thematic relations. So when we move to our net of relations, so the question is, are all these computation relations computed automatically or not? And whether, I mean, if the establishment of these relations is permeable or supported by domain general functions, and if this is so, when do these domain general functions exert their influence? So with electrophysiology, we have a good, we can have a good control on the timing of the effects. But in post-stroke aphasia or so we can ask what their contribution is in, I mean, what the contribution of this domain general processes could be in syntactic processing. And I anticipate that I don't have EEG data on post-stroke aphasia. So we'll rely just on behavioral data. So I'll focus on two domain general functions, although and I'll focus on this two for the sake of coherence through the whole talk. But I'm aware that we should probably, when talking about the contribution of domain general functions to syntactic or any other type of processing, maybe a wider scope of domain general functions should be probably taken into account, given the interrelation among them. So one of the the functions that I'll be talking about is conflict monitoring or cognitive control, executive control, which is that function that is usually involved in detecting. So it allows to detect when there's competition or interference. Now I want to emphasize interference because we'll be talking about interference during syntactic processing. So it is that function that allows us to detect a mismatch, so to say, between what we encounter and what we expected. So if we found a deviation from the expected pattern, so there's a conflict that is triggered, and this results then in a reanalysis of the input to check for processing errors. So it is part of the attentional system, and I'll be referring to the Peterson and Posner account here. So which encompasses the alerting and the orienting system, but I'll be focusing on the conflict monitoring one. So this system is usually, the Posner paradigm, usually measured through the difference in response times between congruent and incongruent trials, like we see here. We think that, so we can hypothesize that higher efficiency of our conflict monitoring system can lead us to a better mismatch detection if we find a mismatch, and so better accuracy and better reanalysis processes in the presence of deviating or mismatching patterns. Now, the other function I'll be talking about is abstract reasoning. Or relational reasoning, so our ability to identify patterns and relationships and extract logical rules, which also relate to problem solving in a nutshell. So I'm being all too brief about this. So here we assume that, so we hypothesize that the greater the relational reasoning abilities that a speaker has, so better integration ability can be expected even in the presence of a mismatch. So better reanalysis procedures, and so better accuracy of detecting mismatches. Now, this is just to set the stage. So what I want to talk about, so the talk is divided in two parts. So I will first go through the EEG and behavioral data that we collected from young adults, and these are data hot from the oven. So we're just finished analyzing this, collecting and analyzing this data. And so I'll be also talking about the dependence or independence from the main general functions that we see in this pattern of data and set of data. And then I'll move to the syntax post-stroke part. And I anticipate that the study is still ongoing. So some of you may have probably already heard about it because Karin may have talked about it. I'll take a different focus. So I'll be focusing on the syntactic part because that's my my part, say. And data are preliminary here. So I have to say that I have more questions than answers. And so we'll see if we can, if you can answer my questions. We'll look at the interaction with domain general functions during recovery of syntactic processing with domain general functions during recovery, and especially the longitudinal part is the one where we have less data. You can easily imagine why. And so that is the part from which I won't draw any firm conclusion. And then I'll leave some time for, of course, discussion and open issues. And yeah. Okay. Hello. Right. So I'll first talk about the data from young adults. This is work in collaboration with Nicoletta Biondo, who is now at UCSF, Nicola Molinaro from BCBL, and Sandika Farah from Unimore in Italy. So the question we asked in this study, which we're currently drafting, it's a register report that we for which we got in principle accepted in Cortex. So is whether syntactic relations are established outside of conscious awareness, so whether they are automatically or not established, or automatically established or not. So We designed an EEG study in which we presented sentences word by word, and we manipulated the congruency of nouns or verbs, depending on the type of relation that we manipulated. And so, for example, in the sentence you see there, seguramente la libro, so that is an incongruence. It's incongruent in Spanish. And the critical word libro could be preceded by an auditory tone that about 100 milliseconds prior to the presentation of the critical word was supposed to disrupt the detection of the anomaly, and so the establishment of, in principle, the establishment of the dependency. The auditory tone could also appear post critical word, after the critical word, somewhere down the stream. And in this case, it was not expected to disrupt the establishment of this relation. So at the end of the sentence, at the end of the trial, then participants had to express whether the sentence they read was correct or incorrect, acceptable or unacceptable, and provide a judgment on the tone that they heard. So whether it had a high or low pitch. So we administered this study to 80 native speakers of Spanish. Also, so besides the grammaticality and the tone judgment, we also did also a flanker task and the reasoning task from the Kaufman brief intelligence test, so the matrices task, a reasoning task. So the critical comparisons that we carried out were within the late tone condition. We wanted to see the effect of incorrect sentences that were detected relative to correct sentences that were detected. And so here, since no distractor prevented the parser from establishing a relation, we were expecting early negative effects, as usually found in mostly Spanish, followed by late positive effects that are usually index reanalysis mechanism. And the other critical comparison was within late tone conditions, where we, again, contrasted incorrect sentences that were detected versus correct detected, again, in the early tone condition, but also incorrect sentences that were not detected. So those that supposedly were being to see whether there were some automaticity and unconscious processing of. So if unconscious processing of these relations occurs and this mismatch is detected outside of conscious awareness, we would expect early negative effects, but no revision or reanalysis because they're not detected. So let's see. So when the tone does not disrupt the relation, the establishment of the relation, so when the tone is late and the violation is detected, we see an early negative effect followed by a positive effect, just like we expected. And the same when the tone preceded the critical word, but in principle disrupted was supposed to disrupt the, let's say, the relation. We also saw this early negative effect, perhaps with a slightly different topographical distribution, and a late positive effect with a similar distribution to what we see in the early negative, in the late tone conditions. But things change in the when the violation is undetected. So here we didn't find what we expected or what we hypothesized could happen if these relations are established unconsciously. So we found no early negative effect, and indeed the positivity that we see is very, very, there was an early positive effect, but it was so minimal and minuscule that it didn't reach, it was negligible. But we think that it was the early onset of the positive effect that we saw in later processing, in later time intervals, that is between 500 and 700 and 700 and 900 milliseconds. So it was an early onset, let's say, positive effect. Behaviorally, we saw that whether the tone was presented early or late, the D prime, that is the sensitivity to the presence of a mismatch, was not affected. So they were correct substantially correct, and I mean, were equally correct in the two tone conditions. So the errors, the undetected violations were about the same in the two tone conditions. But what we also analyzed was the response times to the tone detection judgment. And what we saw was that undetected ungrammatical relations were associated with a delay in the tone detection So it seemed like the mismatch was not detected, but there was a cost associated with that processing, probably with the establishment of the relation, that took priority over other, let's say, assignments or other tasks or other type of information that was supposed to be processed during that temporal window. So when it comes to the association between this electrophysiological effects with the two-domain general functions that we focused on, so in the late tone condition, so we found basically no association between either conflict monitoring or reasoning in either temporal window, or so neither early nor late. In the early tone condition, when the violation was detected, again, we saw no association between conflict monitoring or reasoning and the early negative effect. But we did see not a very big, a very strong relation, but significant, between the conflict effect, which should have been in milliseconds, but I forgot. And the amplitude of the violation effect, basically. So the lower the efficiency of the conflict monitoring system, the smaller the positive effect. And in contrast, the higher the ability in the reasoning task, the better the reasoning, the score in the reasoning task, the higher, I mean, the bigger, the greater, the larger the positive effect that we find in later windows. So when the violation was undetected, again, early time windows, we see no association at all, but we do see again the same association between the conflict monitoring effect and the positive effect. So, but there's a trend for the for association between the score on the metrics scores and the amplitude of this late positive effect. We also checked the correlation between the accuracy, that is the D prime, and the domain general functions. And again, we found no association between the conflict monitoring effect and D prime, but we do see a positive relation between the D prime and the score on the KB matrices. What can we conclude from this? So it seems that the establishment of the syntactic relation is mostly resistant to external interference. There are not so many undetected violations. There are, I mean, truth to be told, the experiment was long. There were a lot of trials. And so we do find a sufficient number of undetected violations, but they were not, they were accurate in doing the task anyways, in both conditions. But there seems to be an implicit cost associated with the establishment of a syntactic relation, because we see that when you don't detect the ungrammaticality, then there's a cost associated with that. So what this suggests is that the establishment of these relations is obligatory, but it is somehow conscious, or especially what is conscious, is the emerging of this early negative effect. So for this early negative effect to be there, to arise, you have to be conscious and aware that there's a mismatch. Otherwise, it is not. In this contrast, previous studies on phrase structure, rule processing, where they found this early negative effect even in undetected violations. But just to be told, so this is it's a different syntactic computation, and those studies were probably also low powered. So there could be several potential explanations here. And also the language, maybe. So English versus a richly inflected language that may trigger more conscious processing. So there seems to be a division of labor between conflict monitoring and reasoning abilities. So conflict monitoring seems to be mostly related to online processing, while we see reasoning that spans beyond the online processing, and it also involves the behavioral response that that metalinguistic part of the processing offline, where you basically what you evaluate what you have read. So now let's see this in action in post-stroke syntax. So this is work that probably Karin some of it probably Karin talked about you, but also there's also Nerea and David Soto involved in this from BCBL. What do we know about language and domain general functions after stroke? We know that post-stroke deficits are multidimensional, that we find very often both language and domain general and executive functions or memory deficits. Aphasia often co-occurs with executive functions and memory deficits. And the question is here, why should we what is the relevance of looking at the interaction between language and domain general functions after stroke? So it is, I think it is relevant from a neurolinguistic perspective, but also from a clinical perspective, because it can help us predict outcomes. So it can help us have a better idea of what the outcome could be based on the on other impairment other than linguistic. And so it could help us target rehabilitation programs. So when it comes to the two functions that we have tested, so conflict monitoring and reasoning abilities, well, tested also others, but for the sake of coherence, I'll be focusing on this. So we know, for example, that from several studies that people with aphasia show slower response times for incongruent versus congruent tasks in flanker tasks. And in terms of abstract reasoning, we have a little bit more mixed results. So, for example, Baldo and colleagues found a positive association between the aphasia quotient and reasoning abilities or executive functions. So here, what we see here on the right is you can see that aphasic speakers were significantly more impaired compared to speakers within normal limits. In relational reasoning. So in those tasks of the Raven's progressive matrices that tested relational reasoning. But there are also studies that found no association, for example, between naming and reasoning ability. So here there could be, part of the mixed findings could also be due to the different types of tests and the different scope, let's say, of the tests that were adopted. So one of the questions that we asked in the study, which is still ongoing and hopefully will be so for a couple more years, so we'll finally get to a bigger sample size. So one of the questions was what was the role and what was the role of the domain general functions in syntactic processing after stroke? So whether it was a stable and fundamental role, and so domain general functions should predict syntactic processing after left hemisphere stroke across recovery stages, or whether this role is dynamic and temporary, so it should change across recovery stages. So being more significant and sizable at early stages, while diminishing its influence as recovery goes on and a better recovery is achieved. So we designed this study, this longitudinal study, in which we test participants at 4 time points in the acute stage, 1 week after stroke, 1 month after stroke, 3 months, and finally in the chronic stage at 6 months after stroke. And we use a series of tasks that we developed, well, Karen developed. And we also obtain CT and MRI scans from the hospital where we test during the first week. So we, in the acute stage, what we test is whether domain general functions at baseline, so to say, in this stage, predict language outcomes, taking into account other factors that could be the size of the lesion, the age of education, and so on and so forth. And later on, for the longitudinal part, what we test is whether domain general functions at baseline predict language outcomes throughout this recovery trajectory. And so we are collecting data from 3 groups. The left hemisphere stroke group, which is our target, so to say, and also right hemisphere stroke patients, which we consider a sort of clinical control group, because we expect this group not to be so impaired linguistically, at least in this case, in syntax. But also non-brain damaged speakers. We have about 20, which we use to have a measure, comparison for those tasks that we have created. And so to make sure that we're really testing, that we're seeing impairment compared to, and also then to have psychometric measures of the validity, to say, of the test that we created. So as I said, the study is still ongoing. So here, sign consent form, we have about, I think at the time I'm speaking now, more than 125. But here I'm talking about, so I'm showing data from 48 participants, 27 of which have a left hemisphere stroke, and those are those who completed the language tasks plus 1 or more domain general tasks. We have to be flexible and accept the fact that they cannot complete all of the tasks. And also those are 48 that, for whom we could see a visible lesion from the scans and CT or the CT scan. So as you can see, as the testing progresses, then the sample size diminishes. And in this case, sometimes there's no data inputting procedure that can help you. And the size of the lesions is small overall. There are a couple of patients with larger lesions, but overall it is small. So here left is left and right is right, and there's overlap in the left hemisphere, especially in the temporal lobe. So as for the language tasks, so we created 4 equivalent versions of this battery of tasks where we test phonological processing, syntactic processing, and semantic processing, both in comprehension and production. So we can use this data to analyze comprehension and or only comprehension, only production, or phonological syntactic processing and semantic processing by combining comprehension and production tasks. So we'll focus clearly, of course, on the syntactic processing. So for which we used a grammaticality judgment task as the one we used with in the EG study, and a sentence elicitation task where participants see a picture and they have to produce a sentence that describes the picture they see. To avoid word retrieval effects, we give labels. So it really amounts to establishing relations between the nouns and the verbs and whatever they see on the screen. And in the domain general battery involves derivatives, progressive matrices, for which we test accuracy. The attention network task, I'll focus only on conflict monitoring. So we use the short version for time reason, because at the acute stage, bedside, it is hard to. I mean, they would only do the ANT task if we use the complete version, which is about half an hour of administration. The short version is about 10 minutes, 12 minutes. But it is the conflict monitoring effect is more reliable than the alerting and the orienting. So we'll focus on this. It is also true that this is a task that is more challenging to administer because it's computer based, and sometimes we find a little bit of resistance in especially in elderlies, because they tell you that they have never used a computer, and so they'd rather not using it in the acute stage. We also ask them a confidence rating, and this for the analysis of metacognition. I won't get into metacognition, but I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A if you want to know more about it. And finally, memory, the forward and backward memory. Memory span. So I'll focus on the reasoning and conflict monitoring functions. So this is what we see in terms of syntactic processing in the acute stage. Again, small lesions, so mild patients, they're very, I mean, as you can imagine, testing severe patients in the acute stage is impossible, and most of the times, but it's also hard to follow them up. Because if they're very severe, they're very dependent, and families comprehensively don't have a lot of time for us. And so this leads us to a sample that is biased towards a mild aphasia. So there are patients who are within normal limits and others that have mild impairment. 3 of them who are severe. They're in general, overall, more impaired. The left hemisphere group, more impaired than the right hemisphere group, and clearly more impaired than the non-brain damaged participants that we tested. In terms of conflict monitoring, we see that the left hemisphere group is more impaired than the right hemisphere and the non-brain damaged group. And the same for conflict for reasoning. So the same pattern. So they do have an impairment, but they don't differ from the right hemisphere in terms of conflict monitoring and reasoning. Now, what happens at the acute stage? So for conflict monitoring, we see that the left hemisphere, so the conflict monitoring effect in the left hemisphere group does not predict syntactic accuracy. In the right hemisphere group, we see something that could be a speed accuracy trade-off, because the higher the conflict monitoring effect, the better their accuracy. But overall, there's no conflict monitoring effect here. So it's a small sample. So I won't draw any strong conclusions, but we don't see here an effect, especially in the left hemisphere group, which is the one that we're more interested in. And longitudinally, whether they have low or high conflict monitoring abilities, as you can see, so the low conflict monitoring is the red line, and high is the is the green one. So whether they have low or high conflict monitoring, it doesn't affect their trajectory. So they recover syntax similarly. Then abstract reasoning. So we do see here an effect of so an association, positive association between reasoning and syntax. So the higher their reasoning abilities, the better they are at syntax. Although again, I'll keep saying that until the end that the sample is small. So these are 27 left hemisphere patients and 21 right hemisphere, and we see a similar but well, right hemisphere patients have better accuracy than compared to the left hemisphere patients. So there's a group effect, but there's no interaction there. And longitudinally, we do see that those who have in the left hemisphere group, those who have low reasoning abilities, they do have they do show lower accuracy in syntactic tasks compared to those that have higher syntactic, higher reasoning accuracy. Right. Okay. So we saw here that reasoning abilities, but not conflict monitoring abilities, predict syntactic performance in the acute stage. So in this is in line with what we see in the behavioral data from the young adults, where the conflict monitoring did not predict the D prime effect, but the D prime score, but reasoning abilities did. So why reasoning and not conflict monitoring? It could be the online versus offline division of labor that we saw before, but I'll go back to this when I discuss in the general discussion, so to say. So baseline reasoning abilities could predict performance in syntactic tasks, and I use the conditional because again, it's a preliminary. So they could predict performance in syntactic tasks from the acute to the chronic stage. And so this seems to suggest a stable relation between these functions, but definitely more data are needed here. So I'm keeping myself open to different outcomes. Now, there are also studies, previous studies that indicated no association between reasoning abilities and linguistic processing, for example, in tasks like naming, repetition, comprehension, in the subacute stage after therapy. So, which could be the case, but this, so we see a similar, so we see this effect of reasoning abilities in young adults that have no brain damage, and so what we have to see for more, we have to wait for more data, but it's what we see now seems to imply to a different seems to predict a different outcomes, and the different outcome could be due to the different types of tasks that we're dealing with, also a different language, and also a different sample of participants. So we see a similar effect in right and left hemisphere. So there was no interaction. They have no interaction between group and reasoning abilities in the acute stage, and this could be associated, could be due to the bilateral distribution of the network that supports reasoning abilities. We know from functional localizer studies by Fedorenko's lab, for example, that the domain general multiple domain task, which reasoning abilities belong to, and other executive abilities are bilaterally distributed, and so it could be this could be one of the reasons. So there's another thing that I would like. So we went a little bit deeper on this. I mean, we also tested semantics and phonology, and so we wanted to go a little bit deeper on this and see whether we could see some difference between syntax, semantic, and phonological processing. So here in the spider web graph there you see, so this plots the fit of the different models that we tested in the acute stage. So we also tested the relation between reasoning and comprehension, the relation between reasoning and phonology, syntax, semantics, and language production. And what we see is that the model that has the best fit is the one that tests the relation between semantics and reasoning abilities. So they have better, so this model has better indices, while the syntactic one, which is the red one, has the one that has worst fit. So it seems that the reasoning semantics relation is more systematic and predictable in this sample of participants than the syntax reasoning relation based on model fit. So this could imply, so one potential interpretation of this is that there's more domain general processing in semantic processing than in syntactic processing. And for one, it's been suggested that syntax has its own computations, it's more domain specific compared to, for example, semantic processing that is also involved in mechanisms that are beyond language, like object recognition, for example. So it's part of a wider language system. So this could be one potential explanation, but that, of course, with more data, we can inspect and investigate better. But it could also be due to the type of to the characteristics of the participants that we tested, or to the fact that, for example, there's more visual processing. So the reasoning task, the Ravens task, have more in common with the semantic tasks that we used, where the semantic tasks involve visual pictures, and so ravens and visual pictures in the semantic process. So there could be more similarity. There could be similar mechanisms across the two tasks, and so this could also be a reason why we see a more predictable pattern, a more stable relation between these two tasks. So we'll see what with a bigger sample. So there are also clinical implications. So if reasoning abilities at the acute stage could be predictors of syntactic and linguistic recovery if this pattern is confirmed. And so this could be relevant because it could be a relevant area of intervention that can help us boost language recovery, even without tackling, for example, language functions directly. So this would be a clinical implication of. Now, so if we put all this together, what we saw from young adults and from post-stroke patients, so again, we see this division of labor between conflict monitoring and abstract reasoning. So the data that we have on reasoning from post-stroke patients are aligned with the behavioral data from the EEG study, and it is reasonable to think that the null effect that we see in conflict monitoring in the acute stage could be due to the fact that we're not testing an online process in a grammaticality judgment task. So we are just testing something offline, and so we're not able to capture that integration mechanism that online we could. And so, as I said, so there seems to be converging evidence from neurotypical and post-stroke participants when it comes to the behavioral response analysis. So the online conflict effects are compatible with left middle frontal gyrus activation in a series of fMRI data that we obtained on the processing of syntactic dependency. So we tested different types of relations in Spanish. And when we superimposed all these 5 experiments, we saw that there was a constant and conspicuous activation in the middle frontal gyrus in the presence of a mismatch. And this neural substrate has been associated also as it's been indicated also as a neural generator of, for example, P600 effects. So it could be, so it is compatible with this line of evidence that we have. Reasoning extends beyond online sentence reading and also online repair processes, and it also involves metalinguistic analysis. So what the behavioral response captures is the involvement of reasoning in the metalinguistic analysis that these participants are doing. And so what about the early temporal window, for which we don't have much in the EEG study? So can we conclude that early combinatorial mechanisms are domain specific or domain general, or both? I think that with the evidence, with what these tasks capture, whether online or offline, we cannot say that. And honestly, I don't know whether there's such a task that can help us understand whether any mechanism, abstract mechanism, is domain general or specific, at least in syntax. So one potential explanation is that there's a dynamic interplay between the middle frontal gyrus and inferior frontal gyrus, which is also consistently activated in this series of 5 experiments that we ran on syntactic dependencies. And interestingly, so while the middle frontal gyrus responded consistently to the detection of a mismatch, the inferior frontal gyrus responded to both the presence of match and mismatch. So it could be that there's this dynamic interplay between these two regions that, so it's neither purely it's neither domain specific nor domain general. So it's an interplay between both. And it's a mechanism that underlies that supports the checking of the fit between incrementally structured elements. So are these task-driven effects? Could be. The task in the EEG study is hard. They would come out of the EEG cabin tired because it was a long task, and also patients could be tired, especially in the acute stage. We could also, it could be task difficulty, there could be, but I also have to say that we ran a series of eye tracking experiments as well with no acceptability judgment task. And we still see early effects of so they just had to read and respond to comprehension questions every 15 items. So not even a regular, so not even, there was no comprehension question after every trial. So it could be, but it could be task difficulty. It could also, one could also argue that the acceptability judgment, it's not so natural a task. In our everyday lives, we don't press a button to say if something is acceptable or not, but we do incur in metalinguistic analysis. So when we speak, we rephrase and we have disfluencies to adjust our behavior. I've been doing this all the time. When we listen to somebody speaking, we detect deviations. You've probably all had P600 effects while hearing me, listening to me today. So we do incur in metalinguistic analysis. So it is not, we don't press a button, but we do that kind of analysis, and especially in multilingual contexts like the ones we work and live usually. So it is not completely unnatural. What is unnatural is the response, which also has so to counter this, we're analyzing connected speech in young adults and stroke patients, and so here we're freer from task effects. This takes a little bit of time because it's a time-consuming process. There's an open question that has to do with the directionality of the relationship. So this observed domain general impairment can be attributed to language impairment. So what is the direction of the directionality of the relationship? So this is an open question. And these are, so besides the analysis of speech impairment, of speech, connected speech, We're also, so the same longitudinal studies is also contributing data to another study that we called BioStroke, in which we also collect blood samples, and because we want to see if we can detect molecular blood-based biomarkers like neurodegenerative biomarkers like TDP-43, neurofilaments that could help us, let's say, enrich the array of biomarkers that can help us predict the outcome of a stroke. And so thank you for your attention. It's Kelly Casco, and these are my minions. And yeah, and thank you.
Wow, let's see if there are questions online.
Yeah, I probably went a little bit over time.
I have a, while we're waiting, we say chat, right? Matt said interesting research. Matt is very, I don't know if he's still there, but Matt Nelson is in Alabama. He's very interested in syntactic processing. We can read it for you.
Okay.
I have a question.
See my.
So I'm sort of intrigued about the results between semantic reasoning that don't show up in syntactic reasoning. And to me, the most obvious, simplest answer is that there's something about the abstract reasoning task that engages language in a way that you don't actually have to think about the sentences, but there's some conceptual reasoning that you're doing. It doesn't need language in the true sense, but it's not non-linguistic truly. And that's why you see this semantic conceptual reasoning.
Yeah, so it's not that we don't see, we see this, that reasoning predicts syntactic performance. It also predicts semantic performance and phonological performance. So, but when we compare the indices, we saw that there was a better fit with semantic processing, which to me, I agree with you. It could be that you don't need so much combinatorics for for the semantic tasks, and not even for the reasoning, maybe, because with the the matrices, no, they're here. Okay, here. So there's some combinatorics that you have, some relational patterns that you have to carry out, I would say. So I would be more inclined to think that it's the visual part that and the underlying similarity of the because I didn't put a slide with the type of tasks that we have, but in semantic processing we have object naming, and the other task that we use is a semantic verification task. So they hear a word, so there is increasing complexity. So they go from a word to a full-fledged sentence, and they have to match, to say whether what they hear matches the picture that they saw. So there's visual processing in both. So I would be intrigued to say that semantic processing is more domain general, saying very more domain general than syntactic processing.
Actually, that's not how I'm thinking about it. Like, I'm thinking that when they're doing this sort of reasoning task, that they're doing this, there's something conceptual. It's not language, but it's like, okay, what fits in that box? It has to be these horizontal lines. It's not language, but it's a conceptual problem solving that's happening.
Probably some language.
Conceptual. I don't think they're thinking horizontal lines, but it's like, this is different from the boxes.
It's not language in the sense that it's not structurally combined. It's probably words, like line with line, or something very
concept.
or concept. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's to me. to me, that makes a lot, it's a simpler explanation because you don't need to have language to process that reasoning task.
But sometimes simpler explanations are.
I'm just thinking
The
aloud
Occam's razor.
because, yeah.
Yeah,
So I
it's
let other people ask.
You should give them time.
So
It can do
very
that.
curious about this relationship between the performance of the abstract reasoning task and these language domains, so phonology, semantics, and syntax, as you've said. I'm curious though, and I know the sample size is smaller,
small,
right,
so-
as it sort of goes on time. But I'm kind of wondering, I really am intrigued by the idea that, for example, sort of what you concluded at the end in relationship to this relationship, that if you could, for example, train abstract reasoning, could it actually benefit language, right? I'm wondering, thinking about that idea, do you have a sense of what the role of like individual sort of characteristics are here? I know there's sort of some unifying characteristics between the folks that are in the left hemisphere group and folks that are in sort of the right hemisphere, but I'm sort of wondering about that claim. What, based on your sort of knowledge of the data itself, do you think there's a role for individual characteristics? Are just some people better at this task
There
than
could be,
others,
so let me see if I think I put the slide in here, so it's not. So, okay, so here we have, it's a very schematic slide, so this is divided by the lesion where, the lesion location. So we see that there are participants, so this is the accuracy in syntax by lesion location. So there are two patients who are really, at floor, basically, and those also have, so P98, for example, is also low in, very low in reasoning. So it may be that and those are temporal lesions. So there are some who are very impaired in both, and some who are more spared in language and a little bit more impaired in reasoning, and the other way around. So it's hard to conclude this from here, but I had a look at it the other day, and I said, well, there's a little bit of everything, and I think it depends on where the lesion is. So where it is more, say, well, in a more languagey area, then or closer to a domain general area. So in the end, it depends on where the stroke is, and the vascular territory is vast, so to say, and so it depends on where the lesion is. Yeah.
very cool.
I just have a quick question. This was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. I think everything is fascinating, but I'm also really interested in the blood biomarker work that you'll be doing.
This is still very new.
Yeah.
I'm not the biologist here, but.
Well, I'm not either,
Okay.
but I think neuroinflammation is such a hot topic right now in dementia. And I come from a dementia background. And I've been to a couple of talks where they talked about, glia and reactive glia and neurodegeneration versus stroke. So I was wondering if you had any hypothesis or anything that you would want to find in this.
So
biomarker.
we have very, very, very preliminary data there that Nerea is presenting at Academy of Aphasia. So she has a poster, and what we saw is that so there are, and we've seen some associations between seem to recall is GF glio GFAP with GFAP and cognitive language and cognitive processing. We haven't analyzed TDP-43 yet, but here, so we're talking about blood-based molecular biomarkers. So what we cannot do is to predict that they will tell us whether the deficit would be more cognitive or more linguistic, because I don't think that they have this, that they have this power, so to say, or that they have the sensitivity. So they will tell us whether there's going to be impairment. But there's no way we can predict. it's not like having a lesion and say, well, a lesion in this area is mostly associated with certain types of, or in these areas, it's more associated with certain types of deficits. But yes, we have seen in GFAP that there's actually a positive relation. So the higher the concentration. So we're testing, we're using blood samples from the acute stage and after 3 months. So and see whether there's usually they're higher in the acute stage and then they decrease. And so yes, to see whether the impairment or the improvement follows the increase or decrease in blood markers concentration. We're also looking at the blood-brain barrier and see, because but yeah, that is still very new. So it's something that we've just started. So I'll keep you posted about it.
Thank you. Very exciting.
Thank you.
I think we've lost a lot of people online because it's way past.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I
So-
didn't
No,
time
no,
it.
no,
I
it's all
couldn't
right.
time it. Listen.
Right, no problem. But anything else here? I think I agree with Chad. I think the blood biomarker is really interesting because I think the key thing is how much does it resolve and how much of that resolution or not resolution affects the behavior.
Yeah, no, and it can also help capture what we don't capture behaviorally or with neuroimaging. I mean, it's also a cheap way to obtain data that can tell us something about recovery, because it's surely cheaper than an MRI scan or a CT scan, and it's easier to collect at the hospital. This is out of personal experience. I mean, we've seen that doctors are more reluctant to put patients in the scanner than getting a blood draw, and it also contributes to having more complete picture of what post-stroke cognitive impairment is, because sometimes they don't recover, they decline. So having a look at these neurodegenerative markers can help getting more information.
Perhaps also those who might later develop Alzheimer's or
Yes.
other.
So if there's something prodromal that we can capture, yes, definitely. That was
The thing that I was thinking about, and she's going in a different direction. What I was thinking about is that you do see that over time, because you showed us this recovery times, everybody gets better.
everybody.
Whether
gets
it's
better.
language or reasoning,
Yeah, I mean,
that's the one thing I was thinking about, but I can ask you
not all of
afterwards.
them.
Yeah, that low reasoning.
Yeah, I know there are
work.
few. I mean, there are very few that go back. I mean, that don't recover. So, I mean, I guess if we get to have
Yeah.
50
Well, actually not this one, the one after this, right?
yeah,
The
there are a
low.
couple of that.
They just don't improve
They don't
over
improve.
time. But for the most part, they all get better. So the
Mhm.
question is, are they getting better because their brains are getting sorted out? Then,
Yeah.
there's inflammation and the stress, the response is getting better, or are these just happening at the same time and one is not causing the other?
Yeah,
Again, I want to think the simplest answer is because the brain's coming to some steady state, the behavior is getting better. That's why
They're-
everybody improves. But
they're also mild. And so
That's true.
I mean, it is true that if they're mild, they have less room for recovery. I mean, that they have less room. But it's easier probably to recover and to get to go back to a ceiling performance. So there are very few of them who get worse. So yeah, so maybe about those we have the blood sample and we see.
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
they are the same participants.
But actually, not this graph, the graph after this, the one,
Yes.
this one.
Yes, yes. So we see.
Yeah, where you have this low reasoning group,
Mm.
that's the only group that doesn't actually get better,
Yeah.
but then otherwise, everybody else.
Yeah,
gets better.
they have this curve, but it's not as, I mean, there's still the accuracy is still, 0.7. So it's not bad.
Oh, that's right, that's true. So everybody just totally recovers.
They recover.
Yeah, cool.